"Excuse me, ma'am." The sponsors use the front entrance. Catering checks in through the service hall. The words echoed across the crystal ballroom with just enough volume to turn heads, and the laughter that followed rolled through the room like it belonged there. Every conversation at the Harrington Foundation Billionaires Gala slowed for a heartbeat as dozens of wealthy executives, investors, and media guests shifted their attention toward the woman standing beneath the grand chandelier. Naomi Brooks didn't react. She wore a simple black evening gown without diamonds, without a designer logo splashed across the fabric, without the usual symbols that announce status before a person ever spoke. At 42 years old, the Black CEO of Brooks Dynamics had learned long ago that some people believed wealth only existed when it looked familiar. Tonight, she had deliberately arrived alone. No security detail, no executive assistant, no photographers waiting outside. She wanted to see what happened when influence entered a room disguised as ordinary confidence. Across the marble floor, Victoria Kensington smiled as if she had just delivered the evening's best joke. The white CEO of Kensington Global Holdings stood surrounded by board members, investors, and politicians, every camera naturally drifting toward her tailored ivory gown and flawless public image. "You're in the wrong place," Victoria said, raising her champagne glass with effortless confidence. "This gala is for people closing billion-dollar deals, not people hoping to watch them." More laughter followed. A few guests looked uncomfortable. Others looked away. Several simply smiled because smiling beside power had always been easier than questioning it. Naomi met Victoria's eyes for only a second before calmly setting her invitation on a nearby registration table. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she answered softly. Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. Victoria stepped closer, the polished smile never leaving her face. "Confidence is admirable," she replied, "but pretending you belong eventually becomes embarrassing." Around them, conversations faded into whispers. A young investment analyst glanced at Naomi's invitation as if trying to read the embossed lettering from several feet away. An event coordinator hesitated, checking a digital guest list before another senior organizer quietly pulled the tablet away and motioned for her to stay silent. No one wanted to interrupt Victoria Kensington on the biggest networking night of the year. The ballroom itself seemed suspended between elegance and tension. A string quartet continued playing near the stage while servers moved through the crowd carrying silver trays of sparkling water and champagne. Beyond the towering windows, Manhattan glittered beneath a warm spring night, but inside the ballroom the temperature felt noticeably colder. Naomi stood perfectly still, hands relaxed at her sides, her expression revealing nothing. She had seen rooms like this before. 23 years earlier, she had been turned away from a leadership conference because someone assumed she was part of the hotel staff. 10 years after that, a venture capitalist had mistaken her for an assistant moments before asking her company for funding. Different cities, different faces, the same quiet assumption. Tonight felt painfully familiar, yet strangely smaller. Victoria believed she was controlling the room, but she couldn't see the invisible threads already connecting everyone inside it to a decision worth $4.99 billion. She didn't know that the future of her company was standing only a few feet away, patiently allowing every word, every laugh, and every judgment to reveal exactly who deserved a seat at tomorrow's table. Victoria Kensington accepted another congratulatory handshake without taking her eyes off Naomi. There was something unsettling about the woman in the black gown. She had not argued. She had not defended herself. She had not walked away. She simply observed the room as though every conversation mattered more than every insult. To Victoria, that quiet confidence felt almost theatrical. To everyone else, it became impossible to ignore. The orchestra drifted into another elegant melody while guests returned to discussing acquisitions, venture capital, and international expansion, yet their eyes continued wandering back toward Naomi every few seconds. It was as though the ballroom itself refused to let the moment disappear. Naomi picked up a glass of sparkling water from a passing server and thanked him with a warm smile. The young man nodded politely, the only person who had treated her without hesitation since she arrived. She slowly walked toward the enormous windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan, appearing more interested in the city lights than in the whispers following behind her. She was not avoiding the crowd. She was studying it. Every expression revealed something. Every uncomfortable glance told its own story. Every nervous laugh identified another person willing to mistake confidence for status and status for character. 20 feet away, Victoria leaned toward two investment bankers. "She will leave in a few minutes," she said with complete certainty. People eventually realize when they are out of their league. The bankers laughed politely, although neither sounded entirely convinced anymore. One of them quietly glanced toward the registration desk, where a junior event coordinator continued scrolling through the digital guest list. The coordinator frowned. She enlarged one name, blinked twice, then looked back toward Naomi before a senior manager gently lowered the tablet and whispered, "Do not create unnecessary confusion tonight." The younger employee hesitated but reluctantly nodded. Across the ballroom, Naomi checked the time on her watch. 8:27 in the evening. Exactly 33 minutes remained before the final signing ceremony scheduled for 9 o'clock. She had memorized the evening agenda weeks earlier. Cocktail reception, investor introductions, closing remarks, final approval ceremony. Everything was running precisely on schedule, exactly as she expected. Her phone vibrated once inside her evening clutch. She looked at the screen without changing her expression. A single message from her executive assistant, Claire Mitchell, appeared. "Everything is prepared. Awaiting your instruction." Naomi typed only 4 words. "Continue exactly as planned." Claire responded almost instantly. "Understood." No one nearby noticed. The brief exchange. They saw only a composed woman placing her phone away before calmly admiring the skyline again. Victoria, however, interpreted the moment differently. "Calling for a ride already?" she asked loudly enough for several nearby executives to hear. A ripple of laughter spread through the group once again. Naomi turned slowly, meeting Victoria's confident smile with one of her own. "No," she answered. "Just confirming that everyone is arriving on time." The sentence sounded ordinary, yet something about the way she delivered it caused several people to exchange uncertain looks. Arriving? Who exactly was she expecting? Before anyone could ask, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and welcomed guests to what he proudly called the most influential business gathering of the year. Giant screens illuminated the ballroom with elegant graphics celebrating innovation, leadership, and the future of American enterprise. Beneath those glowing words, Naomi quietly watched the stage while Victoria basked in the applause surrounding her. Neither woman realized that within the next half hour, every spotlight in that magnificent ballroom would shine for a completely different reason, and the room that had laughed so comfortably would soon discover the extraordinary cost of judging someone before learning why they had truly been invited. The applause faded, but the uneasiness remained. It moved quietly through the ballroom like a current beneath still water, impossible to see yet impossible to ignore. Guests smiled through conversations about mergers, private equity, and global markets, but their attention kept drifting toward the woman standing alone near the windows. Naomi Brooks looked perfectly at ease, occasionally exchanging polite greetings with passing servers while never once attempting to join Victoria Kensington's circle. That calm only deepened Victoria's irritation. She had expected embarrassment. She had expected excuses. Instead, she found patience, and patience was becoming strangely contagious. A venture capitalist from Boston leaned toward another guest and whispered, "Do you know who she is?" The reply came with a shrug. "No idea, but..." "She does not seem nervous." A retired manufacturing executive overheard them and quietly added, "People who are pretending usually talk too much. She has barely spoken." The observation lingered longer than anyone expected. Across the room, Victoria noticed several conversations no longer centered on her. She raised her glass and deliberately walked toward Naomi, with 3 prominent investors following close behind. "I wanted to make sure you found the refreshments," Victoria said with a polished smile that never reached her eyes. It would be unfortunate if someone wandered into an invitation-only event and missed the free food. A few people laughed again, although the sound felt thinner than before. Naomi looked at the sparkling water in her hand and answered with complete composure. "Everything I came here for is exactly where I expected it to be." Victoria tilted her head. "Interesting. Because according to my understanding, every meaningful conversation tonight is taking place over there." She gestured toward the private executive lounge beyond a pair of tall walnut doors where the evening's final negotiations would soon begin. "That area is restricted." Naomi followed the gesture for only a moment before returning her attention to Victoria. I know. The simplicity of the answer unsettled more people than another argument ever could. Nearby, a young event coordinator named Emily Carter quietly approached the registration station again. She reopened the encrypted guest database while pretending to organize name badges. The same profile appeared on her screen. Executive clearance. Full access. Final authorization required. Emily stared at the information, convinced she had misunderstood it the first time. She refreshed the system. The result did not change. Her heartbeat quickened as she glanced toward Naomi, then toward Victoria. Before she could say anything, the senior event director stepped beside her. Close it, he whispered firmly. We are not questioning Ms. Kensington tonight. Emily hesitated. But I think there has been a mistake. There has not, he answered, taking the tablet from her hands. Tonight is too important for confusion. Emily reluctantly stepped back, but doubt remained written across her face. At that same moment, two financial reporters standing near the stage noticed the unusual tension spreading through the ballroom. One quietly lifted his phone, not to record, but to review the evening's published schedule. Something feels off, he murmured. Everyone keeps saying the signing ceremony depends on one final approval. His colleague nodded. I assumed the board already had it. Neither realized the answer was standing less than 30 feet away. Naomi checked the elegant clock mounted above the ballroom entrance. 8:38. 22 minutes remained. She neither hurried nor appeared anxious. Tom was working for her, not against her. Around the room, conversation slowly shifted from celebration to speculation. No announcement had been made. No revelation had occurred, yet the atmosphere had unmistakably changed. The ballroom had begun choosing sides long before anyone understood what was truly at stake. And with every passing minute, the confidence Victoria displayed so effortlessly was becoming just a little harder to share. Emily Carter could no longer convince herself that she had imagined what she saw. She waited until the senior event director disappeared into the executive lounge before quietly returning to the registration desk. With careful hands, she reopened the encrypted guest database one more time. The screen loaded slowly, almost teasing her growing uncertainty. Then the same profile appeared again. Naomi Brooks. Executive clearance. Final approval authority. Priority access. Emily read every line twice, then a third time. There was no mistake. The credentials were authentic, protected by multiple security layers that ordinary staff members could not alter. Her eyes widened as she looked across the ballroom toward Naomi, who remained standing peacefully beside the windows, watching the city lights as though she had nowhere else she needed to be. Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. She remembered the comments, the laughter, the dismissive smiles. Every unnecessary remark had unfolded in front of hundreds of influential guests, and none of them knew they had been watching someone the entire evening who possessed one of the highest levels of authorization in the building. Gathering her courage, Emily stepped away from the registration desk and carefully approached Victoria Kensington. Ms. Kensington, she whispered respectfully. May I speak with you for just a moment? Victoria barely turned her head. If this is about seating, handle it. Emily lowered her voice even further. It is about the guest in the black gown. Victoria smiled without looking. She is leaving soon enough. Emily swallowed. I do not believe she should be asked to leave. I checked the executive list. That sentence finally earned Victoria's full attention. She slowly turned, her expression shifting from amusement to irritation. You checked what? Emily answered carefully. Her credentials appeared to be fully verified. Victoria laughed softly before several nearby executives could hear. You are new, are you not? Emily nodded. Then let me give you some advice. Computers do not understand context. People do. She clearly does not belong among decision makers tonight. Emily looked toward Naomi again. The certainty she had felt moments earlier only grew stronger. Respectfully, I think there is more happening here than we realize. Victoria's smile disappeared. What is happening here is that you are allowing one confident stranger to distract you from your responsibilities. Return to your station. Emily hesitated only briefly before obeying, but the conversation had not gone unnoticed. Two guests standing nearby exchanged uncertain glances after hearing fragments of the exchange. One quietly asked, "Did she say the woman was verified?" The other shrugged. "That is what it sounded like." Rumors traveled through elegant rooms much faster than announcements. Within minutes, small conversations began circling around the ballroom. Nobody knew exactly what was true, but more people stopped laughing. More people started watching. Naomi sensed the shift without acknowledging it. She thanked another server who offered sparkling water and continued observing the room with the same composed expression she had worn since arriving. Her silence seemed almost impossible to disturb. Across the ballroom, the master of ceremonies quietly reviewed his notes before the upcoming signing presentation. An assistant approached him carrying a leather portfolio. "The final authorization document is still pending," she whispered. "We are waiting for one principal attendee." He glanced toward the executive lounge. "Has that person arrived?" The assistant checked her tablet. "According to the system, yes." "Then why has the confirmation not been received?" She looked uncertain. "I do not know." 15 minutes remained before the ceremony. The music continued. Crystal glasses reflected the ballroom lights. Conversations resumed, but they carried a different tone now. Confidence had slowly given way to curiosity, and curiosity was becoming something far more dangerous. For the first time that evening, the room was no longer asking whether Naomi belonged there. It had quietly begun asking who she really was. The atmosphere inside the ballroom had changed so gradually that few people could identify the exact moment it happened. The laughter that had once followed Victoria Kensington now sounded restrained, almost cautious. Conversations paused whenever Naomi Brooks crossed someone's line of sight. The certainty that had filled the room less than half an hour earlier was quietly dissolving into uncertainty. Victoria refused to notice. She accepted another congratulatory greeting, smiling confidently as if nothing had shifted. Then she spotted Naomi walking toward the grand staircase leading to the executive lounge where the final signing ceremony would begin. Victoria intercepted her before she reached the first marble step. "That area is reserved for principals only," she announced, loud enough for dozens of nearby guests to hear. The surrounding conversation stopped almost instantly. Naomi looked toward the staircase, then back at Victoria. "I know," she answered calmly. "Then I assume you also know you cannot continue." Victoria extended one hand toward the ballroom entrance with polished confidence, not touching Naomi, but making the invitation unmistakably clear. "Please enjoy the reception downstairs with the general guests." Several executives watched silently. No one stepped forward. Emily Carter stood frozen behind the registration desk, desperately wishing someone would simply check the authorization list again. Instead, another uncomfortable silence settled across the room. Naomi remained perfectly still. She neither defended herself nor argued. For just a brief moment, the glittering ballroom disappeared from her thoughts. She was 22 years old again, standing outside a leadership conference in Chicago wearing the only business suit she could afford after graduating from college. The registration volunteer had smiled politely before saying, "Vendor check-in is around the back." Naomi had explained she was a scholarship speaker. The volunteer looked past her toward 3 white executives arriving behind her, welcomed them immediately, then returned to Naomi with the same polite smile. "Are you sure you are in the right place?" She remembered standing there holding her presentation folder while people walked around her as though she had become invisible. She remembered promising herself that if success ever found her, she would never measure another person's worth by appearance, clothing, or assumptions. That promise had shaped every company she later built. The memory faded as quickly as it arrived. She found herself once again beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Gala, looking into Victoria's confident expression. Nothing in Naomi's face revealed the old wound that had quietly reopened. Instead, she offered the same composed smile she had carried all evening. "Interesting," she said softly. "Some rooms never really change. Only the wallpaper does." Victoria frowned, uncertain whether the remark was an insult or an observation. Before she could answer, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and announced that the executive signing session would begin in exactly 10 minutes. Guests holding premium credentials were invited to proceed toward the private lounge. Executives began moving across the ballroom in elegant groups, discussing projections, investment strategies, and the historic agreement everyone expected to celebrate before the night ended. Naomi remained where she was. She checked the time once more. 8:50, exactly as planned. Her phone vibrated gently inside her evening clutch. She glanced at the screen. Claire Mitchell had sent another brief message. All parties are assembled. Final authorization pending only you. Naomi closed the screen without replying. Around her, no one realized that the entire evening had quietly reached its breaking point. Every speech, every introduction, every champagne toast, and every expectation surrounding the $4.99 billion agreement now rested on the silent decision of the very woman many people in that ballroom still believed did not belong there. 10 minutes remained, and time was no longer counting down toward celebration. It was counting down toward truth. 9 minutes remained before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The executive lounge beyond the walnut doors filled with board members, investment partners, attorneys, and financial advisors, each believing they were moments away from witnessing one of the largest agreements of the year. The atmosphere carried the quiet confidence of people who expected history to unfold exactly according to plan. Outside in the ballroom, Naomi Brooks remained unhurried. She glanced once toward the elegant clock above the entrance before reaching into her evening clutch. Her phone illuminated with another message from Claire Mitchell. Every principal has arrived. Legal counsel is standing by. Banking authorization is waiting. Naomi read the message without changing her expression. Then she typed 4 simple words. Initiate protocol Meridian. The reply appeared almost instantly. Understood. Executing now. Naomi locked the screen and slipped the phone back into her clutch as though she had answered an ordinary message. No dramatic gesture. No announcement. No visible urgency. Yet within seconds, events far beyond the ballroom quietly began moving into place. In a downtown law office, senior counsel received an encrypted notification requesting immediate attendance through secure conference access. At the investment bank managing the transaction, compliance officers paused the release schedule. After receiving a priority verification request attached to the final authorization file. Inside Brooks Dynamics headquarters, Claire calmly entered a private conference room where members of Naomi's executive leadership team were already seated. No one panicked. No one asked unnecessary questions. They had rehearsed complex negotiations for years, and every person understood exactly what Protocol Meridian required. Back at the gala, Victoria Kensington accepted another compliment from a television reporter who praised her leadership ahead of the expected signing. She smiled confidently while photographers captured images beside the foundation's illuminated backdrop. Everything appeared flawless. She never noticed that several executives had quietly begun checking their phones after receiving unexpected calendar alerts requesting them to remain available until final authorization had been confirmed. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Conversations shortened. Smiles became more restrained. One attorney quietly stepped away to answer a confidential call. Another investor refreshed his email twice before looking toward the executive lounge with growing curiosity. Emily Carter watched the room transform without fully understanding why. She had seen no announcement, no confrontation, and no public accusation. Still, the confidence that had carried the evening was slowly giving way to cautious anticipation. She looked toward Naomi, who remained exactly where she had been only moments earlier, calmly observing the ballroom with the same quiet patience that had unsettled everyone from the moment she arrived. Emily suddenly understood something important. Truly powerful people rarely needed to prove they were powerful. Their decisions simply reached farther than anyone else could see. 8 minutes remained. The master of ceremonies received a folded note from an assistant and read it twice before slipping it discreetly into his jacket pocket. Across the ballroom, the senior event director answered a phone call, listened silently for several seconds, then ended the call with a puzzled expression. Even Victoria noticed the unusual interruptions. Is there a problem? She asked one of the organizers. Nothing significant, he answered politely, although his uncertain tone suggested otherwise. There appears to be a brief delay involving the final authorization process. Victoria smiled dismissively. Those things happen. Naomi heard the exchange without reacting. She already knew the delay had nothing to do with technology, paperwork, or logistics. It had everything to do with one signature that could not be replaced, delegated, or assumed. Around the ballroom, every elegant clock continued moving toward 9 o'clock. To most guests, the evening still looked like a celebration waiting to begin. To Naomi, It had already become a test of character whose outcome had been quietly decided the moment people chose assumptions over respect. The grandfather clock in the ballroom struck 9 with a single dignified chime. Every conversation dissolved into silence as the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage, adjusted his microphone, and smiled toward the distinguished guests gathered inside the executive lounge. Ladies and gentlemen, he began warmly. Thank you for joining us for this historic evening. Before the final agreement can be executed, we are waiting for one last authorization from the principal decision maker. Victoria Kensington straightened her jacket with complete confidence. She assumed the brief delay would end within seconds. Around her, attorneys organized contracts, investment bankers reviewed financial summaries, and photographers prepared their cameras for the signature everyone expected to witness. Then the master of ceremonies glanced toward the event director standing near the entrance. The director quietly shook his head. "We still do not have final authorization," he whispered. A ripple of confusion spread through the room. Victoria frowned. "That is impossible," she said, looking toward the lead attorney. "Every approval was completed this afternoon." The attorney carefully cleared his throat. "Every approval except one." Victoria turned sharply. "Whose?" Before anyone answered, the walnut doors leading into the executive lounge slowly opened once again. Every face instinctively turned toward the entrance. Naomi Brooks stepped forward at the same calm pace she had maintained throughout the evening. She neither hurried nor hesitated. The room watched in complete silence as she crossed the polished marble floor. Emily Carter stared in disbelief. Several executives who had ignored Naomi earlier now instinctively stepped aside, creating a clear path without anyone asking them to move. Victoria folded her arms, unable to hide her disbelief. "I think there has been another misunderstanding," she said. "This session is restricted." The lead attorney looked at her, then at Naomi, before answering with unexpected formality. "No, Miss Kensington, there has not been a misunderstanding." He walked directly toward Naomi and extended both hands respectfully. "Ms. Brooks, thank you for your patience. We have been waiting for you." A silence unlike anything earlier that evening settled across the room. It was not awkward. It was absolute. Victoria stared at the attorney, then at Naomi, searching for an explanation that refused to appear. The attorney continued, his voice carrying clearly across the executive lounge. "As controlling chair of Meridian Strategic Capital and Majority Approval Authority representing Brooks Dynamics, Ms. Naomi Brooks holds the final signature required before the $4.99 billion acquisition can legally proceed." Several guests visibly stopped breathing for a moment. One investment banker slowly lowered the folder in his hands. A financial reporter looked down at his notes, then back at Naomi, realizing he had spent the entire evening standing only a few feet away from the most influential person in the transaction. Emily quietly closed her eyes, remembering every warning she had tried to give. Victoria's confident expression slowly disappeared. "That cannot be correct," she said quietly. The lead attorney calmly opened the authorization portfolio and turned it toward her. There, beneath the legal documentation and corporate seals, Naomi Brooks's name appeared beside the words "Final Executive Approval Required." Every signature before hers had already been completed. Every institution involved had fulfilled its responsibility. Every celebration planned for the evening depended entirely upon one remaining decision. Naomi accepted the leather portfolio without triumph or anger. She simply looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the same people who had measured her by appearance instead of character. The laughter from earlier had vanished completely. In its place stood a room finally forced to confront the extraordinary difference between recognizing wealth and recognizing worth. No one spoke. Hundreds of influential people stood in complete silence as Naomi Brooks rested one hand on the leather portfolio containing the final authorization documents. The room that had confidently judged her only minutes earlier now waited for a single decision that no attorney, investor, or executive could make on her behalf. Victoria Kensington took one cautious step forward, struggling to recover the authority that had seemed effortless throughout the evening. "Ms. Brooks," she began, forcing a polite smile, "if there has been any misunderstanding tonight, I am certain we can move beyond it. We all share the same objective." Naomi looked at her calmly. "Do we?" The question was gentle, but it carried enough weight to make the room even quieter. Victoria hesitated before answering. Business is about partnerships. Naomi slowly nodded. I agree. Partnerships begin with respect. Contracts simply record what respect has already built. Those words settled over the executives gathered around the signing table. Several lowered their eyes. Others remembered the laughter that had echoed through the ballroom less than an hour earlier. Naomi carefully opened the portfolio and reviewed the final pages, although she already knew every detail by heart. The acquisition would have created one of the largest technology partnerships in the country, expanding thousands of jobs, opening new research facilities, and reshaping an entire industry. It had taken nearly 18 months of negotiations to reach this moment. Every institution represented in the room had invested enormous time, trust, and resources preparing for tonight. The lead attorney quietly placed a fountain pen beside the signature line. Whenever you are ready, Ms. Brooks. Naomi rested her fingertips on the pen but did not pick it up. Instead, she looked around the room one final time. She saw Emily Carter standing near the doorway with visible concern. She saw servers who had shown her simple kindness without knowing her position. She saw guests who now appeared deeply uncomfortable with their earlier silence. Finally, she met Victoria's eyes. Before I make my decision, Naomi said, I would like to clarify one point. If I had introduced myself when I arrived, would tonight have unfolded differently? No one answered. The silence itself became the only honest response. Naomi gave a slow, thoughtful nod. That is exactly why this moment matters. She gently closed the portfolio without signing it. A quiet gasp moved through the executive lounge. The lead attorney looked up in surprise. Ms. Brooks. Naomi placed the portfolio back onto the polished conference table. Brooks Dynamics will not proceed with this acquisition under its current terms. The sentence was delivered without anger, without raised voices, and without satisfaction. It sounded less like revenge and more like a conclusion reached after careful reflection. Victoria's expression turned pale. You cannot be serious. We are talking about a $4.99 billion agreement. Naomi answered with complete composure. No, we are talking about the culture that would exist after the agreement. Numbers can recover. Character is much harder to rebuild. Around the room, board members exchanged stunned glances while attorneys quietly closed their folders. Investment bankers lowered their tablets as notifications immediately began reflecting the suspended transaction. Months of preparation ended not with celebration, but with a lesson no financial projection had anticipated. Naomi thanked the legal team for their professionalism, offered a respectful nod to the organizers, and stepped away from the signing table. She had not raised her voice once that evening. She had not demanded an apology. She had simply allowed every person in the room to reveal their values before making the only decision that truly belonged to her. As she walked toward the ballroom entrance, no one attempted to stop her, because everyone finally understood that the most powerful signature in the building had never been the one placed on paper. It was the one deliberately withheld. The ballroom remained silent long after Naomi Brooks disappeared through the grand entrance. No orchestra resumed playing. No photographer asked for another picture. No executive hurried to fill the uncomfortable quiet with optimistic predictions. For the first time that evening, titles, fortunes, and influence seemed remarkably small. Victoria Kensington stood beside the unsigned agreement, staring at the empty signature line that only moments earlier had represented certainty. Now it represented consequence. The lead attorney carefully closed the leather portfolio before addressing the room with measured professionalism. The transaction has been formally suspended. Further discussions, if any, will occur only at the discretion of Brooks Dynamics and Meridian Strategic Capital. There was no anger in his voice, only procedure. Around the conference table, board members slowly gathered their documents while investment bankers exchanged thoughtful glances. Some were disappointed by the financial outcome, but many were thinking about something far more significant. They had just witnessed a negotiation collapse without shouting, without threats, and without public humiliation. It had ended because respect had never entered the room before the contract did. Emily Carter quietly walked toward the ballroom entrance, hoping to thank Naomi before she left. She reached the front steps just as Naomi's car arrived beneath the hotel canopy. Ms. Brooks, Emily called gently. Naomi turned with the same calm expression she had carried all evening. Emily took a careful breath. I am sorry for what happened tonight. I should have spoken louder. Naomi smiled warmly. You spoke when it mattered. Sometimes integrity begins with one person willing to notice what everyone else ignores. Emily nodded, holding those words close as though they were more valuable than any business lesson she had learned in college. Naomi continued, never underestimate quiet courage. It changes rooms long before rooms realize they are changing. With that, she thanked the hotel staff who had treated her with kindness, stepped into her car, and disappeared into the lights of Manhattan. In the weeks that followed, the story spread throughout the business community, not because of the suspended agreement, but because of the reason behind it. Leadership journals discussed the importance of organizational culture. Corporate boards expanded executive training focused on unconscious bias and professional respect. Several companies quietly reviewed their own hiring and hospitality practices after recognizing uncomfortable similarities. Brooks Dynamics continued growing, eventually announcing new strategic partnerships with organizations whose values aligned with its own. Naomi never publicly criticized Victoria Kensington or anyone else from that evening. She simply continued building companies the same way she always had, believing that dignity was not something granted by powerful people. It was something carried by people who understood their own worth. As for Victoria, she eventually discovered that rebuilding trust required much more than rebuilding financial projections. Reputation could not be purchased, negotiated, or inherited. It had to be earned through consistent character, especially when no one important appeared to be watching. Looking back, many guests realized the most unforgettable moment of the gala had never involved billions of dollars, legal documents, or corporate headlines. It was the quiet decision of one woman who refused to allow disrespect to become the foundation of a partnership. Wealth may open doors, influence may fill ballrooms, and success may attract attention, but character remains the only achievement that cannot be borrowed or assumed. The world often forms opinions in seconds, yet true leadership is revealed by the patience to answer prejudice with excellence, arrogance with composure, and discrimination with unwavering self-respect. Because the strongest statement is not always the loudest one. Sometimes it is the calm decision to walk away, leaving an entire room to discover that the person they underestimated was the one who had the power to define the future all along.